Just go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us about your dog life journey.
Okay, so I grew up with Rhodesian Ridgebacks from the early 70s. And then I had a brief period for about 15, 16 years with no dogs. And then about 16 years ago, well, it would have been about 17 years ago now, I started on the path of looking for a suitable Boerboel. Well, it was quite daunting. More importantly, the Boerboel breed as such is filled with a lot of mythology and heavy marketing propaganda. So you've got to sift through that. So, for example, 15 years ago, to say that the Boerboel is a guardian dog and will protect you and everything, in the working people, testing dogs or having proven dogs was the given thing to do, right? If you're going to put out a statement. In the Boerboel world, it was frowned upon. Like, you couldn't question people's marketing, right? You weren't allowed to question it. And they would automatically assume you were some sort of thug or some sort of hooligan. And that became the status quo. So it meant a lot of breeders got away with false marketing, and the small, very, very small percentage of people tended to be cast aside and labelled as being not desirable for owning this breed. Well, I believe that there was, particularly in Europe and the United Kingdom, in Western Europe and the United Kingdom, there was a very elitist mentality. And they put up the price of the dogs to tremendous amounts of money in those days, which was pretty much unaffordable for the average working dog person. And so they made the dog, like most dogs are, dogs in general become a cultural identity for people and a social status. And the social status that the marketing propaganda had done, particularly in Western Europe, was that this breed was a very middle-class consumer commodity, and therefore they priced it accordingly.
That's not really what the Boer people, that wasn't the way they looked at it, correct? Absolutely. So these dogs normally would have been given for free or traded with other farmers and other local people in the townships, and that sort of thing would go on. And there was hunters and people like that who generally needed good, healthy, sound dogs. So the dogs were dogs. I mean, in most societies across the world, dogs have always been just something that is for the benefit of humankind, right? And I think probably in the early 19th century, late 18th century, I think the dogs were very much a breed fancy for the very elite in societies, particularly in the Victorian eras. And so you had dogs that would reflect their status to their owners. The Boerboel was a working dog, and like the German Shepherd or the Presa Canario, it's always been a working dog. The Staffordshire Bull Terrier as well, the Pit Bull Terrier, always been a working man's dogs. And so the price has to be reasonably reflective if a dog's a working tool as well as a companion. And if it's priced like a Fabergé egg, then it becomes more an ornament that you look at as opposed to something that you're going to work, right? Right, absolutely.
Right, you spend all that money, the last thing you want is for that dog to fall apart because it looks beautiful by the log fire.
Right.
It's picture beautiful, but for the average working person, I mean, remember in the old days, I mean, the Bull Mastiff and most of the Mastiff breeds were designed for a purpose in mind, and it's a very much
a shift in society. It's the shift of society's attitudes towards working dogs. But particularly in the last 20 years, I mean, the demise of most bull breeds has been pretty rapid.
Yes.
So I think the Boerboel certainly was a dog that had a place for the farmer. And this is going back in the 1930s, 1940s, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the 50s and 60s and up to the 70s, perhaps starting to wane a little bit. And that's when the Boerboel really was a really good dog. But the word Boerboel comes from the farmer, which meant an Afrikaner, a Boer, trekker, would have dogs. And so any dogs that he owned would be considered Boerboel, or particularly the big dogs would be called the farmer's bulls or farmer's bull. And that's where it got its name. And of course, the name got exaggerated, right? Mm-hmm. So the dogs became monstrously large and dysplastic and everything else with that.
I've heard that the modern version is definitely prone to hip dysplasia.
They're terribly unhealthy. They have a huge reproduction issues. They can't breed properly, naturally. So where natural reproduction is no longer the status quo for a breed, any species, it should, under normal circumstances, become redundant. Mm-hmm. Well, of course, it's not really about the breed of dog or anything else. It's about commerce and economy.
Right.
And so it's dictated, like, this is what the market wants and this is what we will produce.
Mm-hmm.
But is it the real Boerboel?
Right.
I mean, the real Boerboel was a dog called the Frontier dog, which had much longer legs, it had thinner bone, longer muzzle, and a much healthier, viable breed.
Right.
And then, as soon as it became a breed standard, then there was a internal fight to see who would have the biggest dogs, the most impressive dogs. And of course, like we all know, these things become exaggerated over time to like where the pendulum shifts tremendously to the other side. I think it was probably like the food we taste in our childhood. Mm-hmm. So I grew up with Rhodesian Ridgebacks all my life. And, in the 1970s, the Rhodesian Ridgebacks were pretty large dogs. I mean, they could grow up to about 50, 55 kilos. Mm-hmm. And they were quite big and impressive dogs. And, of course, that breed started to get thinner and smaller and smaller. And, of course, no one needed big Rhodesian Ridgebacks anymore. Mm-hmm. So I suppose a Boerboel, when I looked at Boerboels many years ago, they impressed me because they looked like a Ridgeback. Mm. They have the same sort of affection and tactile communication between families. So I think it must be a South African thing, like the old South African hunting stock dogs, right? Because they pretty much belong to the same tree. Mm-hmm. They just branched out in different directions. But I've been over a few times, and it's nice to have an in-depth knowledge of the country's history, and particularly its people, because usually, rather than reading what breed enthusiasts write, if you read about the history and culture of a country and the people who were behind a breed of dog, you'll pretty much understand how and what the real history of the breed is. Mm-hmm. But if you read what a breed enthusiast writes, well, I mean, you're reading nothing but historic, romantic rhetoric, right? Mm-hmm. Which is complete nonsense.
Right. Mythology,
It's absolute mythology.
Yeah.
right? Because, I mean, fundamentally what we wanted was good working dogs, and good family dogs, right? That's all we needed. And, like, you know, it wasn't something that I'm going to invest a huge amount of money for me for. Like, it's just a dog.
Right.
Like, I love my dogs, right? But, like, they're not the most important facet of my life.
Right.
So, like, all work tools, you know, they're pretty much, you know, they have to work like me and you and everyone else. Like, no one gets a free meal.
Right.
Well, I went over to South Africa. I went to see, I think it was about 47 breeders in total. That was back in 2006,
Wow.
/7. And at that time, I was just at the height of Boerboel mania. And I went to tremendous expense to import a female Boerboel from South Africa. She was a kennel dog. Lovely, great family dog, but just had no steel, no metal, not a very defensive streak in her. And you need a little bit of defensive streak if you want a good guardian protector. There's got to be a little bit of defense drive there, right? A little bit of nerve.
Yeah.
I mean, not a lot, but just enough. So yeah, so that was it. And so I brought her over and I bred 2 litters from her. Then I kept 1 puppy from her, which then I competed in IPO, ZWP, ZTP. She'd done the Presa Canario breed test, and so she was the first female in the world to be titled in the Presa Canario breed test, the ZWP, where she got the 1 and 2, the first female Boerboel in the world to get IPO titles. And the first to get the British Institute of Professional Trainers Security certificates as well.
Wow, what did the old school Boerboel people think of you then?
Well, no one really cared.
Right.
Like, I was doing it for myself, right? Because it's my passion, and you see, if you have to spend 3 years dedicated to day in, day out training your dog, sacrificing your time and everything else, it's a huge expense.
Right.
And no Boerboel breeder in their minds would want to go to the expense of doing that if they know they can sell dogs all day long without having to do anything. So it became the status quo. And if you look at the German Shepherd world, well, they know in that highly competitive world they've got, if they don't keep on top and title their dogs, then they don't get buyers.
Right.
The KNPV guys, like, they won't sell puppies if they don't have working title dogs. So, you know, it was a guy in the United States, Brandon Wilson, who was the first man in the world to have titled a Boerboel in IPO, the American Working Dog 3, which is the old Schutzhund, FH 1 and 2, which is the advanced tracking. And he had probably the most highest titled Boerboel in the world to date. And he's based in Kentucky. And of course, he was hoping for great things, but unfortunately, you know, the Boerboel community had sort of turned its back, right? So they don't really look upon the Boerboel as a working dog. I mean, there's a small pocket of people across the world doing it, but the numbers are so insignificantly small, it's hardly a dent in the whole population. It doesn't even cause a ripple.
Right.
Then, of course, your
onto another platform of problems where you will have a group of people who all might work baubles and have the same mindset. But of course, egos get in the way of that, and therefore they're not able to form some sort of solidarity in order to move forward and come up with an international breeding program.
Right.
So it becomes very much a hobby for any individual to pursue.
Mm-hmm. But is there still farmers out there with the rustic version?
No,
Mm-hmm.
there isn't. There was one or two who probably maybe even just a few years back. There's a guy called James Brennan who kept to his old, very strict standard of pack keeping. There was Klaus van Weveren who died years ago, but I was recently there in 11 years after my first visit, so I was in there in 2018, and it is nearly all the breeders have disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
From the board. Well, of course, there's no money in it now, you see.
Right.
The market is dying for the breed. There's no direction. There's too much internal fighting. It's not an FCI recognised breed, so it's no more different to a band dog, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is the biggest problem they had, and because there were so many different breed registries, well, everyone's fighting for a spot, but no one's got real legitimacy. It's almost like the Wild West.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the breeders that gave up, they'd fallen out with each other and things like that, and so nearly all of them, and of course there's no money in it, so they all went breeding English Bulldogs, Schnauzers, all sorts of breeds, but not the Boerboel.
And with the particular political climate, it seems like it may be even a worst case scenario for the Boerboel.
Well, that's quite interesting, and I totally agree with you. I think it will be, and you got to remember, I mean, what many people don't tell you on the internet, and what the history doesn't tell you, is that the breed only became not famous but infamous in the 1980s during the apartheid regime.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they'll never mention this, right?
Right.
Like, it just doesn't carry any favour. But, like, you know, it was only within the Boer and the Afrikaner community it was considered the racist watchdog.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it got its infamous status from. I mean, this is something that but it was the fact, and of course this was all false propaganda. I mean, the Afrikaners were marketing the dog within their own communities as the racist watchdog.
Mm-hmm.
And this is how it became across the prisons across the United States, the Western Europe. Everyone knew in the prison system the next best dog was the Boerboel.
Mm-hmm.
But of course none of it was proven. I mean, when these dogs went to the United States, you had all-time breeders who imported these dogs in by the tens, multiples of 5s and 10s. Mm-hmm. And, of course, a lot of these dogs, I mean, these are all very highly intelligent and academic working dogmen in America, right? They were like old pit bull men, old American bulldog men, old racing greyhound men. And so, like, you can't bluff these guys. They know their stuff.
Right.
So when you had Afrikaners in there with their arrogant attitudes, sending over piles of dogs that were dysplastic, couldn't run, couldn't stand the heat, just in general really unfit and bad examples of any dog per se, let alone the breed. Like, you know, it made these guys question it.
Mm-hmm.
And those who did buy the breed, like, they'll never admit it. They'll never say to you the breed is not good. But what they'll do is, because they've invested so much money, they have to perpetuate the myths.
Right.
I'll give you an analogy here. You know, I could put a real diamond, I could put a real Swarovski crystal in front of each other. Mm-hmm. And if the Swarovski crystal's bigger, people go for the Swarovski crystal. Okay, it's just a piece of glass.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But Swarovski's made a fortune from selling piece of glass.
Mm-hmm.
It's not even fantastically cut glass. But I put a small quarter carat flawless diamond there, you know, and most people overlook it. If I put a 3 carat diamond there and a quarter carat diamond, most people go for the 3 carat diamond. They're not looking for the colour, clarity, or consistency, or the cut.
No.
You know, because they just don't know.
Right.
Like, you know, this is the problem in the bull breed world. Despite whatever bull breed, Press Canario world, the American Bulldog world, they're all blighted by the same ignorance and lack of education. You know, which is that everyone's big and imposing and everything else, but it's not enough.
No.
I mean, it's not, you know, look, there's perfection, or what we hope to get as much as we can in terms of perfection, and what is just average. And if everyone wants just average, which tends to be the status quo, then that's what happens. There's a market for average, right? But what the breed should reflect is the price of them. You know, if I could buy a Dutch Terrier or a German Shepherd for £500-600 in British money, maybe $900, $700, then, and I can get a dog that's like 3-4 generations, working title, pedigreed, health tested, everything else, and then I'm paying $2,500 for a Boerboel. I mean, you can't compete, right? Like, I'd rather have the German Shepherd over the Boerboel. I mean, the looks are great, right? But what good is the looks if I'm going for a 5-10 mile hike in the hills and then the dog can't keep up with me?
Right. No.
Or it only lasts 6 or 7 years. Look, that's a simple case of economics and business, right? Like, if someone can't make profits on breeding dogs, then don't breed them.
Right.
Like, get a job, right? It's like very simple. Like, you know, the world doesn't need dog breeders.
Absolutely. I just
you know what it needs is a handful of people to do it, not everyone. And look, I look in the Boerboel world. Someone pays £2,000 for a female. They say, I've spent all this money. There's a lot of money to make. If we get a litter or 2 litters a year, we can make a lot of money, and I can retire, and we can retire. I've seen people sell their homes, take their children out of really good schools, move in the middle of nowhere in some land, and then start breeding dogs, only to realise 2-3 years later everything falls down around them. Right. You know, it's a false economy. I mean, look, breeders could. I mean, you take 4 females, you can breed them. That's 4 litters a year if you play your cards right and you're savvy, and you know you do your marketing correctly. You're going to make the money. But if you have to pay for C-sections, artificial inseminations, health costs because the dogs are ill or something like that, and you've got to keep them alive in order to have those puppies, then of course it's going to hurt your pocket. But then if that's something you have to do, you'd have to question, why would you want to breed those types of dogs in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, I have no problems with people making huge amounts of profit. But what I do want, if you're going to give me a product, I want value for money on that product. Right. Like, if I'm buying a Ferrari, I know why I'm paying the price, right?
Right.
You know, most, like, this is what people don't understand. Like, people think that Louis Vuitton is just, you're paying for a name. You're not paying for a name. Right. You know, you're paying for a certain quality of stitching, a certain quality of material, a certain detail, which you don't get on the average. And the problem with the dog breeding industry is it's not regulated.
Right.
And the standards are very, very low. People, it's the consumer. Like, you as a consumer, you've got a demand from breeders. Don't let them be arrogant.
Right.
Like, don't let them dictate to you why they might consider giving you a dog. Like, there's loads of dogs out there. Like, who the hell are you?
Right.
Like, you prove to me that I should come to you. And, like, my standards are high. Like, if you can't keep up with the game, you have no place breeding dogs.
Yeah, especially dogs that you try to pass off as working dogs.
Yeah, Absolutely. Look, I when I wrote in my contracts, I only had 2 litters in 15 years. And I only will breed for myself. I've recently imported a female over, and she's only to breed 1 litter out of. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
Just so I can have a puppy. Because it's a whelping process, and what I do in that whelping box for the first 12 weeks is the most critical on how that puppy's neurological development will start to map out. That's absolutely critical, right? There's so much time involved.
Mm-hmm.
No breeder's going to do that for me. So if I want to do something, I've got to do it myself, right?
Right. Absolutely.
But you see, this is the thing. I mean, it's horse of course. I mean, if breeders can't do that, then don't do it. As long as you, the consumer, are going to be there to have a cute little puppy, and then of course it grows up to be a health issue, then that's your problem.
Right.
You as a consumer should make demands, and there should be more people to tell people. There should there are good Boerboel forums in America that tell people do your research. Don't take anything for granted. Make sure the person behind that internet screen really is a legitimate person. Yeah, I mean, it's just the world we live in, right? It's just everything's changed. It's the millennial generation, instant gratification, and egos and demigods. Everyone's risen above,
right,
everything else. We've all become demigods, right? So, but I think people should question, and I think there should be a very strict regulatory body. I think I was reading in the United States that they're putting in a petition to ban puppy mills in the USA. And I think they're doing this suit in Europe. I mean, the Boerboel breed is already banned in a few countries in Europe. That will start to roll out even more because of the huge amount of breeders and indiscriminate breeding. And is it the real Boerboel?
Right.
Is it the Boerboel that the history had told you about? Were these people telling the truth? Who wrote the history of the breed?
Can you talk about your journey about your book and how that came about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I spent many years doing research about 16, 17 years ago on the Boerboel breed, and I'd gone up and down the whole of the United Kingdom, and I sort of got a very bad reputation because I said, listen, if you want to sell me a puppy, I want to test the male, I want to test the female to see if they've got protective instinct. And of course I was considered to be a hooligan, a thug and everything else, and of course that threw me across many different tangents, which then I ended up travelling most of the Western Europe. And of course I was talking to a lot of the founding fathers of the breed who were still alive then, 15, 16 years ago, so they were telling me about the breed rhetoric and everything over the phone. Well, of course, so I kept all the notes and photos and articles and everything over the many years, and I was making notes and everything, and then in 2006-07 I went to see one of the founding fathers who created the breed, Lucas van der Merwe, and I spent a week with him, and of course the truth comes out after a few days, and suddenly when they realise that you have half a knowledge, they suddenly realise that they can really open up and tell you the truth from their perspective. And so I gathered all my research, and of course testing dogs, working dogs across many countries across the world, Russia, South Africa, most of Western Europe, United States as well. I just gathered all my information, and I'd studied the history of South Africa, the history of the Afrikaner, and compiled all my works together. And of course it's about the working Boerboel, myth, fact or fiction, and it breaks down the facts, the fiction, and it gives examples of where the breed's going to be in the future, where it's heading, how it can be salvaged, and it breaks down all the myths of the marketing propaganda, and it talks about the things that were controversial for the breed, like the black Boerboel, which was one of the biggest upsets in the breed. But it states quite specifically, like, I went straight to the source, the person who had the black Boerboels initially, to find out exactly where the breed came from with the black Boerboel, and I found that out, and that's in the book. And there are examples of Boerboels running away from protection, big, huge dogs, right? And this book is for the consumer. It is not for breeders of the breed, and it wasn't designed for breeders. It was for working dog purists, for bull breed purists and pugilists. It was aimed for, and it was. So all the brick walls I was hitting and all the blatant lies and dishonesty that I had to come across, I thought, put it all in a book and let the consumer read the book, and then they are armed with facts.
Right.
As opposed, and all the facts in the book are cited. Like there's citations for the facts, so we have the source of those facts, right? Which it isn't just based on my opinions, right? Because I mean, although we've all got opinions, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're right.
Right.
So, but it's the longest history ever written on the breed. And there's over 200 photo illustrations in there. Wow. So it's and it talks a lot about the Presa Canario as well, and the difference between the Presa Canario community, the identity of and cultural identity of the Presa Canario communities, and the difference of the Boerboel community, and it asks why the Presa Canarios developed and progressed so far in terms of its working stature, yet the Boerboel still is hitting the plight of the English Mastiff.
Yeah,
it's heading that way, right? Yeah. So it's quite daunting, and this is why the book is, and it's mainly the accounts of the old Boerboel men, and even then I have to break their theories and their stories down, right? Because a lot of them had told me things that were frankly dishonest and not true. So you've got to very much fact find. If they say something, like, you just don't take it, right? Like you've got to research that then, and then you'll say, well, you told me this, but there's credible evidence that this is completely untrue. Oh, well, I wasn't quite sure. Then if you weren't quite sure, why did you tell me? Like, if you've told already 100 consumers out there the same thing, that means 100 consumers have been duped. Like, it's blatant dishonesty, right? And this is because there's no regulation, there's no regulatory authority.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I think that the dog world in general is very amateur and very unprofessional in general, right? Unless it's like the elite of shoring dogs, where there's huge amounts at stake, or say the Bundesliga and the German Shepherd world, where dogs can go up for $40,000. Like, you're talking money then, right? And that's where you get the more Premier League of professionals. But certainly in the 90% of any industry, I mean, particularly the dog industry, it's very amateur. But, I mean, look, the Boerboel does have a future. It has a future as long as the vision of those in the masses dictates what it is they want. So it's like everything becomes fashion. And I think in America you had a huge thing. You've got a very liberal left wing now. It was once a very conservative country many years ago, right? Now you have some, I mean, the word decadence. Yeah. It's all decadence, isn't it? An indulgence of decadence, a bit like the Roman and the Greek empires before they, mysteriously hit
Well, not so mysteriously, but, before they toppled and fell. So, I think the dog world is pretty much like that. The bull breed world, anyway, certainly. I mean, Colonel David Hancock wrote a great book. I think many of you'll probably know that book anyway, don't you? The Big Game Hunters, yeah. And his book as well said the same thing. I mean, most pugilists in the bull breed world talk about this. They talk about the exaggeration of the breeds where they've become unhealthy. I mean, the British Bulldog can't even breathe no more.
I will always have a bull breed of some sort, but even if that means I have to buy 2 good dogs to make an excellent dog, I'm going to do it, and it won't be for profit or anything. It will be for my personal journey. So,
well, absolutely, and what price you put on a good dog? It's priceless, right?
Yeah.
And we don't care what most of us I think as you grow older, you realize that the important things in life are the things that give you a sense of self-satisfaction. You're not living for other people's expectations anymore. Like, those times have gone. So, what is good for you might not be good for someone else. But if you're doing it with your heart and with sincerity, then pretty much. And the thing is, when we do something in life, if there's honesty and transparency, this is the most important thing. For me, in my world anyway. There should be no reason for people to lie. And, I think, there's a word called integrity, which seems to be out of fashion nowadays. And, you have integrity, then you never need to worry about something. You might not make any friends because you don't fit into that status quo, that certain camp. But it doesn't matter, right? Because those are obviously not the people. We surround ourselves with like-minded people, right? So, I mean, look, I have baubles. I don't have any bauble friends.
Right.
On my Facebook, I don't have any bauble friends. I continue with the breed. I wrote a book on them. But I don't have bauble friends. I have no Facebook bauble friends because I had nothing in common with these people. I work dogs. I train dogs. That's what I do. And the clients whose baubles come to me for residential training, a lot of them are really lovely people who just wanted a good family dog, right? They become my friends because they're not breed enthusiasts or breeders per se, who tend to be very competitive and, that sort of agenda. And we don't have time for it, We're all about enhancing our own lives and the relationship between us and our dogs, which is all that matters.
Absolutely. Could you tell me what you look for in a puppy to compete in protection sports and to be a good family guardian? What are the characteristics?
Absolutely. So the things I look for is a good movement in the puppy, really good fluid movement, a very bouncy puppy. I look for a very inquisitive puppy. I look for a puppy that likes to explore, super confident and super friendly, right? I look for a puppy that's very dominant. And this is only my personal choice, is I look for something that gives me a bit of resistance. A puppy that, won't let me, has strong food aggression. That's number one for me. I like my puppies to have very strong food aggression and just a very strong attitude. Like if I don't like biddable puppies, I like them to be non-compliant. When I have that and the movement is good and everything else, but in general, for a good family dog,
you should just look for something that's super confident, very outgoing, good movement, and that's all you need. The rest will be training.
Right. And what does that training look like from puppy stage to adolescence to adulthood for you?
Huge amount of what we call controlled environmental exposure. And when I say controlled environmental exposure, like puppies, people tend to think that puppies need to be exposed to a lot of things outside. And as much as that's correct, they can also be exposed to the wrong sort of things, which can then, particularly with bull breeds, they're quite sensitive dogs. Because they don't have the prey drive, they don't have something that can go through that barrier. So they can get caught up in pictures. And so if they've had bad experiences, puppies, particularly with lots of people thinking, what a cute puppy, and they go straight over them and everything, it makes the puppies very apprehensive, and they could, multitude of different things can happen. So like when I introduce puppies to new dogs, they're always very neutral, stable dogs. Like, I don't just let them in puppy class. I'm completely against puppy class, and I'm completely against dog parks. I think they're the biggest places where dogs learn, the biggest problems.
Like, for example, what kind of problems?
Well, I mean, if you have, for example, like little dogs, are a prime example, right? Like, for example, they're mollycoddled, and then they're mollycoddled, and then they're held, and of course big dogs run up to them, they get frightened, the owners pick them up, they start getting aggressive because they've found new confidence, and of course, there you go, every little dog in a park becomes aggressive.
Right.
But it's okay because it's little, right?
Yes.
And then you get young puppies who are super confident, and then you get a big dog and it gets bullied and everything else knocks its confidence.
Right.
Then they start becoming submissive. Like, for 1 year I don't really mix my dog with other dogs for the first 1 year.
Okay.
And maybe 10 minutes maximum a day. That's all they need. After a year old, like 12, 40 months old, like, they won't even bother with other dogs. Like, they'll go and say hello and they'll be friendly. And then they'll say, okay, great.
All right.
So it makes you wonder, doesn't it? Because the biggest problems I have is pet dogs.
Yeah.
Like, I get a lot of Boerboels come to me who are pet dogs. They're loved by their owners, but they've got the shittiest behaviours, right? And you wonder why.
Yeah.
Because I bring a female over from South Africa who's been a kennel dog all her life. Like, she's walking in London Underground with me. She's walking off leash in busy streets in London. She's like with kids. She's never seen any of this before in her life.
Right.
And I'm not saying genetically she's got amazing nerves. What I'm saying is, like, that's maybe partly due to it. But the fact of the matter is, because she's not been exposed to negative things, like, it's just of no consequence to her.
Right.
Like, there's no bad memories there.
Right.
And this tends to happen a lot in socialisation. But I mean, for me, I socialise with children in nurseries, the puppies. I socialise them with adult dogs, and lots of people around and everything. But I don't let people make a fuss with the dogs. Like, the dogs know there's lots of people around. They don't need to touch or hold or cuddle the puppy. They can just be neutral to the puppy. Like, the puppy says, okay, there's lots of people there, they're cool. And, I don't have a problem with them. So in 3 years' time, the dog's not going to have a problem then, right? Like, it shouldn't have a problem. Like, it's been around people and other dogs and everything all its life. And it's always had good, positive exposure and experience. So there's no reason why it would get shitty, but the majority of dogs I get have got really, really shitty behaviours, and it's not genetical. Like, it's learned behaviour.
Right.
You know, so I don't know. I mean, it's just, I suppose, in a way, I mean, you know, it's just the way that a lot of people, they want, like you said, they want these beautiful, gorgeous dogs. They love the way they look. But if you get a big bull breed that's got a highly defensive attitude and nerve, like, you've got a walking time bomb there, right? Like, if you're, like, not aware.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can be an experienced handler as well, right? But you're never going to want to let that dog off the leash.
Right.
And then you're going to avoid people. And then when you avoid people, like, it becomes even more less socialised.
Mm-hmm.
Which then heightens its curiosity. And so it becomes a full circle.
Right.
Well, just before I go, but I thought while I'm on here, I would plug my book anyway to you.
Yeah.
It's The Working Boerboel, Fact or Fiction.
Yeah.
It's available on amazon.co.uk. But read it. It's an interesting part, and it not only gives you a reflection of the Boerboel, but it's also a reflection of many of the bull breeds in today's world and the modern society, and where they came from, and all the different agendas of marketing and everything else. So there's a lot of chapters, you know, in there, the importance of the female, the world according to Adam, you know, the final myth, the final curtain call. So there's different, like, you won't think you're reading a dog book, but it actually sincerely is.
Saying how good the book was.
Well, thank you very much,
Yeah.
and I look forward to sharing whatever I can for you and your audience, and it was really nice speaking to you, Son.
Nice speaking to you, and I will talk to you in a month or so. Thank you for your time.
All right, no problem.
All right.
You're most welcome, son. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Good girl. Clever girl. Good girl. Oh, good girl. Good girl. Oh, I said good girl. I'm going to run her off.
Hit him! Hit him! Stick him! Yeah, man, hit him in that road. Yeah, man, hit him! Yeah, man, hit him! Hit him!
Consider joining our Patreon community to access exclusive content, early releases, and personalized experiences. Subscribing not only supports Sean from the Bulldog Social Club, but also connects you with a community of like-minded enthusiasts. Whether you enjoy Sean's interviews, appreciate creative processes, or desire exclusive perks, your subscription plays a crucial role. Click the link, subscribe, and be a part of this journey with us. Enjoy listening to audio podcasts like I do? Consider joining the Bulldog Social Club Spotify membership. For a limited time, it's only $1.99. Get early releases and personalized experiences. Subscribing not only supports Sean from the Bulldog Social Club, but also connects you with a community of like-minded enthusiasts. Whether you enjoy Sean's interviews, appreciate creative processes, or desire exclusive perks, your subscription plays a crucial role. Click the link, subscribe, and be a part of this journey with us.